My name is Alexandra Alex Carter, and right now I'm sitting in my beat-up Honda Civic in a gravel pull-off less than a mile from my family's Long Island estate, clutching a single white orchid between my palms and praying my jittery heart will settle before I walk through that front door. It's July 17th, 2025, high summer in the Hamptons, yet I feel colder than any winter shift I've ever worked in Bellevue Hospital's ER. I was supposed to be here 10 minutes ago. The Carter family reunion starts at 6:00 p.m. sharp. It's not just dinner, it's the annual spectacle where my sister Brooke Carter and her husband Brian Richards parade their latest real estate conquest, and where I've always been cast as the struggling nurse sister, the backup plan who takes the bus and lives in a tiny studio far away in Queens. Tonight, I hold a secret that will flip their world upside down. I glance at the single white orchid, my mother's favorite flower, the one Brooke always uses to decorate her tables, and let its fragile petals remind me beauty can bloom under pressure. Last year, Brooke draped ivory orchids across every surface to celebrate her first Hamptons flip, bragging about her Sotheby's senior broker commission, while I silently picked up extra night shifts to pay off student loans. The orchid in my hand now isn't just a gesture of false solidarity, it's a symbol of what's about to change. Traffic had snarled me in Montauk for 2 miles, and my heart pounded each time I imagined Brooke's smirk at my tardiness. She's going to ask again, bask in Hampton's heat, and still can't beat the clock, and I'll let her. Because tonight, I'm armed with something sharper than words closing papers. For the very beachfront villa she's been bragging about for months, stamped with my name. I force myself to take a slow, steadying breath, no second guesses. This is payback wrapped in perfect timing. I kill the engine, grab my orchid, and ride the gravel like a Hollywood starlet making her grand entrance, except this actress is here to steal the show. The driveway's lined with luxury SUVs and Teslas, all polished to mirror sheen. Private security nods hello as I step out, adjusting my simple navy sundress. No designer logos, just tailored confidence. My sister's hand-picked playlist drifts through the open foyer, a curated soundtrack of breezy jazz that only underscores the tension. As I cross the threshold, I can already feel Brooke's gaze slicing through the air like a scalpel. Alex! You made it! Mom sweeps across the foyer, her silk dress swishing eyes bright, but shadowed by worry. She embraces me, and for a split second, I almost believe I'm just her little girl again. Traffic, she whispers. I nod, pressing the orchid into her hand. It was bad, but I'm here. Her smile falters as Brooke appears on the staircase, tall, immaculate heels clicking. Brooke's lips curve into that calculated grin that could sell beachfront lots at a whim. Traffic, she repeats, louder eyes flicking to my dress, then to the modest tote bag at my feet. Funny, I heard you were taking the bus. A chill runs down my spine, but I stand my ground. I drove. I reply evenly, straightening. Hospital parking's a nightmare, so I parked near the train. Laughs ripple through the assembled cousins and aunts. Jeremy Carter, my cousin and the family's unofficial social media guru, raises a glass from across the room and mouths, "You got this!" His sympathetic grin a lifeline. In this world, every second of pity is fuel for my next move. Brooke glides forward, champagne flute in hand, designer heels clicking like metronomes, each click marking another second. I've been underestimated. That's cute, she says, voice dripping condescension. What is it this time? Saving up for rent, laughter swells. My cheeks burn, but I let it wash over me. Tonight, I'm the storm on the horizon. I lift my chin. Actually, I have news too. Heads turn. Her brow arches. I thought you were busy saving lives. I don't flinch. I was. And now I'm saving something else, an investment opportunity in the very estate you've been drooling over. I press a single button on my phone. Behind Brooke, on the big screen TV that usually shows family slideshows, pop up the closing papers. Alexandra Carter. Owner 12 Beachview Road, Watermill, NY. Dead silence. The orchids in my mother's hands tremble. Brooke's lips part like she's gasping for air. But I'm not done. As her perfect facade begins to crack, I tap another notification, an encrypted email from Sarah Delgado County legislator promising a triple value buyout offer the moment a resort deal finalizes. Brooke's jaw clenches. She glances at Brian, his face blanching under the foyer lights. My heart pounds. This is the moment where everything tilts. Brooke's eyes lock onto mine, fury burning hotter than the July sun. "This is a joke," she hisses, voice low. "There's no way you outbid us." I step closer, white orchid clutched in one hand, RFID access card, to the estate dangling in the other, a symbol of my silent power. "Check again," I say softly. "You taught me your market tricks. I just mastered them faster." The crowd shifts, whispers, weaving through the air. My mother's hand flies to her mouth. Jeremy's phone lights up with live social media comments. Marcus Lee, my friend and fellow ER doc, appears beside me with a proud nod. He'd helped me verify the financing under cover of night. I let the moment stretch, a pregnant beat before the storm. And then, the front door swings open behind us, and a street artist's spray-painted mural stares everyone down, 2 orchids. One wilting, one in full bloom, framed by the words, "Silence isn't weakness, it's strategy." Brooke's face goes pale. At that instant, I know nothing will ever be the same. I turn to my family voice, steady and calm. "Who's ready for dinner?" I ask, and the room fractures into chaos. But somewhere beneath that chaos, a new power hums a promise that this is only the beginning. The room erupted into a cacophony of gasps, shouts, and snapping phone cameras as I stood by the mural white orchid petals painted across a crumbling brick wall. One bloom pristine, the other drooping with the words, "Silence isn't weakness, it's strategy," sprayed in bold black. I felt every eye on me, every pulse of astonishment and betrayal. But inside, I was calm, cold, even like the ER bay after the chaos of a mass casualty. My heart still thumped in my ribs, but each beat was a metronome keeping me steady. I looked over at Brooke, her mascara running in smudged tears as she stared at the mural, then at the closing papers blinking on the screen, then back at me. She took a stumbling step forward, as if to attack. But the orchid I had pressed into Mom's hand was a shield now, its white petals shining like a beacon of my resolve. Mom's fingers trembled around the orchid stem. She looked torn between pride and panic. Dad hovered behind her mouth, open eyes watery. Cousins in designer labels clutched their purses and bouquets, as if to barricade themselves. Brian Richards raced forward, suit jacket flapping. Fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. "Alex, you can't! This is fraudulent!" "We had it under contract," he barked. I inhaled and met his glare. "No, Brian," I said, voice carrying easily. In the stunned hush, you never had an offer. You only had a promise to hold. Promises aren't deeds. Brooke recoiled, stepping back as if I'd slapped her. Screeching whispers passed through the guests. Jeremy Carter's phone lit up with endless notifications, live stream comments flooding in, "Sister saves the day, Brooke BTFO, Orchid Power." My cousin turned to me with wide eyes and mouthed, "You did it." He was the only one smiling. His loyalty lay with real drama. And I'd just delivered. I glanced at Marcus Lee, my confidant among the chaos looming in his surgical scrub pants and crisp white coat. He gave me a curt nod. Solid work. He stayed back enough not to embarrass Brooke, but close enough to shield me if things turned violent. I appreciated the silent solidarity after all medicine taught me that even in the most fractured moments, alliances formed the backbone of survival. Then the tide turned. Aunt Vivian Carter, ever the social adjudicator, wrung her lace gloves in distress. "This is shameful," she shrieked. "Carter values have been trampled." The family elders murmured in agreement. Betrayal, scandal, reputation. But a flicker of doubt crossed their faces. None of them had the actual deed in hand, except me. Brooke staggered forward, cheeks flushed red. "You're nothing but a petty thief," she hissed. "I'll sue you for slander, fraud, emotional distress." I stepped closer, lifting my chin. Slander. "Your words didn't build a title." I pressed a finger gently against her chest. "Fraud, you never inked the deal." Her lips quivered. I let my hand drop and turned to the crowd voice, soft but carrying. "If anyone here thinks I'm some backup plan or a charity case, I suggest you rethink what you know about nurses, about persistence, about who does the real work when the fancy suits fall apart." Silence followed, dead, heavy silence. The only sound was the slow drip of water from the fountain outside. I could feel every stare drilling into me, some in awe, some in anger, some in envy. My shoulders straightened. I was locked in now. There was no walking back through that door. I raised the RFID card in my hand, the little plastic rectangle that had opened more than any golden key. "This card grants me access," I said, tapping it against my hip. "Last night, after everyone went to sleep, I scanned it at 12:17 a.m., just after you all toasted to success. Brooke and walked right in." I watched her face contort with a mix of rage and disbelief. The orchid in Mom's hand toppled its petals, kissing the marble floor. I noticed Marcus step forward and scoop it up, tucking it into his coat pocket. The orchid would live to bloom again, just like me. As the guests gawked, I slipped out through the French doors to the veranda, the distant hum of cicadas greeting me as relief trickled through my veins. Outside, the air was warm and salty. I leaned against the porch rail, watching Brooke's silhouette fade behind the curtains. Jeremy emerged beside me, tossing his phone into his pocket with a grin. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. I exhaled, eyes on the horizon. "I've never felt more alive," I admitted. "Or more terrified," he chuckled. "Not even during your first code blue," I forced a laugh. "That was a drill compared to this." My mind buzzed with the stakes, legal challenges, family feuds, reputation wars. I pictured Sarah Delgado's text, "Sale approved. Triple value offer pending. Meet Tuesday." My phone pinged again, new email from the county clerk's office. I clicked it open and skimmed the subject line, "Urgent ownership transfer under review." My stomach dropped. I turned to Jeremy, eyes wide. "They're flagging the transfer. They want more documentation," I murmured. His grin vanished. That could freeze everything he said, tone grim. "If they stall, Brooke's lawyers can step in." The veranda lights flickered behind us as a summer storm rolled in off the ocean. Thunder rumbled low, promising rain. I swallowed hard. "Then I need to move faster," I said, voice steely. I lifted my gaze to the darkening sky clouds swirling like an omen. "This is a race now." Jeremy nodded. "What's next?" I closed my eyes, centering myself. The orchid petals in Marcus's pocket bloomed in my mind, a symbol of resilience. I felt the core of my inner strength pulse. I would not let bureaucracy or betrayal derail me. When I opened my eyes, I saw Brooke standing at the broken mural, staring at the wilting painted orchid. Her stance was one of someone cornered and calculating. She glanced up, catching my eye on the veranda, and a flicker of something like respect, and then pure hot anger flickered in her gaze. The first raindrop splashed onto the porch rail. I didn't flinch. Instead, I took a step forward toward the storm. "Tuesday," I said softly, more to myself than to Jeremy. "Tuesday when we finalize everything." He placed a hand on my shoulder. "I'll be there." I gave him a small, grateful smile. Without another word, I turned and walked back inside, rain starting to patter on the roof. Behind me, Brooke's silhouette melted into the shadows of her shattered facade. In the hallway, I heard the distant wail of sirens, maybe an ambulance, maybe the storm. My pulse raced. I clutched the orchid Marcus had pressed into my palm when I'd gone out, its petals damp but unbroken, and tucked it close to my heart. I threaded through the stunned guests, fanning out in every direction, claiming my path through the wreckage I'd created. Each step echoed as if marking the beat of a new drum, my drum. I passed Brooke standing in stunned silence beneath the mural, her heels sinking into the spilled champagne on the marble floor, mascara mixing with tears and red wine. She looked up, eyes locking with mine. For a moment, everything slowed. I saw the hurt, the betrayal, the fear in her eyes. And beneath that, something else. A glimmer of admiration. No, it was challenge. She wasn't done. The whispered promise of her next move crackled in the charged air between us. In the grand foyer, Dad stood by the collapsed orchid on the floor, his world turned upside down. Mom pressed her hand to her mouth, tears slowly spilling. But I felt only clarity, purpose, the unshakable belief that I had claimed more than property. I had claimed my voice and my place in this family. I reached the front door and paused, hand on the brass knob. Outside, the storm raged, not destructive, but cleansing. I took a deep breath, feeling the surge of adrenaline. This was no longer just about revenge. It was about rewriting the narrative the world had written for me, a narrative of a struggling nurse from Queens. I would show them what it meant to fight with strategy with silence turned into power. As I pushed the door open, rain spattered against the glass, thunder rolled overhead. And I stepped into the tempest orchid petals pressed tight in my palm. And in that moment, I knew the real battle was only beginning. The morning after the storm, I woke to the smell of coffee and cardboard boxes. My tiny Queens apartment was a clutter of takeout containers, scattered medical journals, and unopened documents from the county clerk's office demanding additional proof of residency and validation of funds. I ran my fingers across the orchid petal Marcus had pressed into my palm on the veranda, still white, still perfect despite the rain. It sat in a folded tissue on my nightstand like a talisman. I dressed in scrubs, knotting my dark hair into a loose bun, and laced up my sneakers. I knew today would test everything I'd built: my nerve, my strategy, my quiet obsession with proving Brooke wrong. In the elevator down to the street, I rehearsed potential scenarios. They'll freeze the transfer. Brooke's lawyers will file an injunction. I'll lose the property. My pulse raced, but I reminded myself of that little orchid resilience in confinement. If a delicate flower could survive concrete and chaos, I could survive a paper storm. At the street level, the air smelled of rain-soaked asphalt and garbage trucks. The world felt normal, completely oblivious to my personal earthquake. I hailed a cab to Bellevue Hospital. On the ride, I checked my phone again. No updates from the clerk. No forwarded messages from Sarah Delgado. My last text from her read, "Pushing for express review. Call me after shift." I shoved my phone into my pocket and focused on the passing storefronts. The bodega with the neon chicken sign, the halal cart plume, the unhurried shuffle of morning commuters. Everyone going about their day, none of them knowing their heroine was about to pull off the coup of the century. At the ER desk, Marcus Lee greeted me with a tired grin. His eyes were warm behind his surgical mask. "You look ready for battle," he said, handing me a mug of dark roast coffee. "They cleared your transfer paperwork for now," he added quietly, nodding toward the papers in his hand stamped, "Preliminary acceptance." Relief flooded through me so strong I nearly cried. "Thank you," I whispered. "You saved my ass." He shrugged. "Just doing my job. And maybe your revenge is entertaining." His smile was a lifeline. In moments of doubt, I'd lean on friends like Marcus, who believed in me when everyone else saw a struggling nurse. My shift was a blur, arriving trauma patients, bleeps on my pager, adrenaline, and exhaustion colliding. Yet in every lull I checked my phone. Sarah's name flashed on the screen at exactly 11:27 a.m. Meeting confirmed at 4 p.m., county office. My heart kicked. Any delay now could sink the deal. As I inserted an IV line into a car accident victim, my hand was steady. My mind focused on that meeting. Each successful procedure felt like a chisel cracking Brooke's polished facade. By mid-afternoon, I slipped out of the ER in a spare pair of jeans and a crisp blouse, tucking my scrubs into my bag. Marcus gave me a pointed look. "You're sure you don't want me to come?" he asked. "I've got your back." I smiled. "I need to do this solo, but text me every 5 minutes." He nodded, sliding into his car as I flagged down a rideshare to Nassau County. The county office was an austere building of gray stone and flickering fluorescent lights. A metal detector beeped as I walked in, and I patted my pockets for the RFID card before they scanned me. The guard gave me a curious glance as I showed the card with my name printed neatly on it. He swiped it, the turnstile clicked, and I stepped through with a thrill. Every access point I navigated was a silent victory over the system that once locked me out. I found Sarah Delgado's office on the 3rd floor, a polished nameplate next to a pane of tinted glass. Inside, Sarah waved me to a leather chair behind a broad mahogany desk. Sunlight filtered through blinds, casting stripes across her white pantsuit. "Alex," she greeted, voice firm but kind. "Glad you made it." She slid a folder toward me. My fingers tingled as I flipped it open. "Expedited title transfer, approved, final signature pending." Beneath it, her handwritten note. "Don't celebrate yet. Brooke's team sniffing around. We need your signature in 20 minutes. My heart pounded faster but focused. "I'll do it," I said. Sarah stood and clicked her pen. "There's a clerk in room 312 who will witness and ratify the signature. After that, you're technically the owner, but Brooke will try to challenge. I've lined up an appeal window if you need it, limited but usable." I nodded, tension coiling in my chest. "Thank you for believing in me." She smiled, a politician's practiced warmth, but genuine. "You made the system work for you. Use that." Armed with the folder, I marched down the hallway to room 312. The clerk behind the glass window barely glanced at me until I slid the papers forward. He rubber-stamped and signed within seconds. "Congratulations," he said, eyes flicking at the orchid petal tucked in the folder's edge. "Nice touch." I tucked the folder under my arm and walked out into the lobby, head held high, feeling the weight of every skeptical glance, replaced by the thrill of legitimate power. But as I turned to leave, my phone vibrated violently. A text from Brooke tonight. My mansion. Family dinner. "You're going to regret this." My chest tightened. Brooke's lawyers had clearly mobilized. I typed back slowly. "See you at 7. I pocketed the phone, the folder, the orchid petal, each piece a weapon of my silent arsenal. Back in Manhattan, I raced through midtown traffic, thoughts racing Brooke's threat. Might be bluster, but she had resources. High-priced attorneys, social connections, whisper campaigns. I needed to stay ahead, anticipate her next move. I glanced out the window at the skyline, the Empire State, the Chrysler Building, symbols of ambition and conquest. I reminded myself I was no longer just Alex the nurse. I was Alex the strategist. By 6:30 p.m., I stood outside my apartment, changed into a sleek black jumpsuit, simple, powerful, and slipped the folder into my clutch. I pinned the orchid petal into my hair, letting it rest above my ear like a silent banner. At 6:50, I hailed a town car to the Hamptons estate again, excitement and dread gnawing in my stomach. Tonight would be round 2. As I pulled into the familiar driveway, security recognized the RFID swipe and waved me through. The mural was gone. Someone had painted over it. In its place, a hastily taped sheet of white butcher paper fluttered in the breeze. I stepped out, smoothing my jumpsuit, and walked across the lawn. Guests drifting in gave me curious looks. Whispers trailed behind me like ghosts. At the front door, I paused, inhaled deeply, and rang the bell. Inside, the grand foyer glittered under the chandelier. Brooke hovered by the staircase, arms crossed, makeup flawless, anger barely concealed. She gave me a slow nod. "Right on time," she said, voice cool. "You look professional." The guests murmured. I met her gaze evenly. "Good evening, Brooke." I slipped past her into the living room, noting the strategic layout, family seating, on the left cocktail table, on the right a clear path to the dining hall. Brooke's logic was to block my entrance and frame me as the villain. I would turn that against her. I moved to the cocktail table and lifted a flute of champagne. The bubbles tickled my throat as I surveyed the room, Aunt Vivian pretending not to stare, Mom clutching her pearls, Dad avoiding eye contact, Brian muttering under his breath. Jeremy waved me over and slid an iPad onto the side table next to me. "Your live stream," he whispered. I nodded. The headline blinking at the top read Alex Carter's shocking comeback night, nurse outsmarts Hampton's elite. The comments scrolled, Queen Energy go. Alex and more vicious ones like, "She'll pay for this classless." I took a slow sip, letting the champagne's warmth anchor me. Brooke cleared her throat and motioned toward the dining room entrance. "Dinner's ready." She led the procession and I followed, keeping my expression neutral. The table was set with ivory linens, silver chargers, and of course, white orchids at every place setting. The contrast struck me Brooke's attempt to reclaim the orchid motif as her own. I plucked one from my hairpin and laid it on the table before my plate, folding the edges, so it looked like a deliberate statement. A few heads turned. Brooke's lips twitched. After the blessing, dishes began to circulate. Seared scallops, heirloom tomato salad, herb-crusted lamb. The first courses glided by, and small talk buzzed. Brooke spoke of market trends, of next year's flip potential, her voice a polished cascade. I listened, nodding politely, waiting for my cue. The twist would be psychological, let her talk herself into a trap. Halfway through the meal, I cleared my throat. Conversations dimmed. I reached into my clutch and slid the folder onto the table where Brooke sat. Her eyes widened. "What's this?" she whispered, but everyone leaned in. I tapped the folder. "Your lawyers sent me a copy of Notice of Intent to Sue filed this morning." Gasps around the table. Brooke's face drained of color. I continued, voice steady. They allege fraudulent transfer based on alleged misrepresentation of residency and funding. Funny my documents say otherwise. I opened the folder and slid out a printout of my hospital badge, a bank statement showing direct deposit of bonuses, and the clerk's stamped approval. The room fell silent. A server paused with a silver platter of roast potatoes. Brooke's voice shook. "You can't. That's not. Where did you get those?" I leaned forward, placing a hand on the folder. "I file everything meticulously. I've run my life on night shifts and budgets. I don't miss a detail. You taught me that." I glanced at the place cards, every name now turned toward me. "If you want to challenge me, you'll have to go through the state Supreme Court. Meanwhile, this property is mine." Brooke's lips parted, her posture collapsing inward. The last streaks of daylight through the windows cast her in shadow like a villain whose plot had been unmasked. The orchid I'd placed before me was a silent emblem of my victory and her defeat. I let the moment stretch, savoring the hush before the storm. Then a low rumble thunder, echo of the previous night's storm, or the crack of Brooke's world breaking. The sky outside had darkened. Rain pattered against the windows. My pulse synced with that patter as I closed the folder and met Brooke's eyes. "I hope you sleep well tonight," I said softly, rising from the table. "I know I will." I gathered my clutch and walked toward the foyer, heels echoing on hardwood. Behind me, plates clinked, forks dropped, and Brooke's voice rose in a strangled shriek. "Alex, wait," but I didn't. Outside, I paused under the eaves, rain soaking my hair and the orchid petals. They drooped slightly, reminding me even the strongest blooms need care. I tucked them into my clutch, raised my chin, and stepped into the night. The drive back to Queens was illuminated by streetlights and neon signs. My reflection in the car window looked fierce, tired, triumphant. My phone buzzed a message from Sarah. "Well done. A final review tomorrow. Then it's official." I texted back. "See you then." I exhaled. The orchid petal pressed against my thigh, fragile and real. Tomorrow would decide everything, but tonight I had won the battle within the system and the one in Brooke's mind. A quiet smile curved my lips. The real test, the one that would define my future, awaited at dawn. The first light of dawn filtered through my bedroom window just as my phone buzzed, jolting me awake. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from the after effects of last night's champagne, but from the knowledge that today was the final showdown. I rolled over, blinked at the screen, and saw Sarah Delgado's name flashing. Meeting moved up to 9:30 a.m. Bring all docs. County reviewing environmental impact as well. Environmental impact. My chest tightened. I'd been so focused on Brooke's legal machinations, I'd overlooked the possibility that the land itself could be under fire. A rogue wave of panic washed over me, property law and environmental regulation, two arenas I barely understood. But beneath the panic, a spark of determination flared. If I could survive the ER's worst mass casualty drills, I could navigate bureaucratic quagmires. I threw off the covers and grabbed yesterday's legal folder, rifling through it, until I found the preliminary title transfer approval. I tucked that under one arm, grabbed my laptop, and dashed into the tiny bathroom to wash my face with cold water. In the mirror, I saw the swollen orchid petal Marcus had pressed into my palm, now pinned to the wall above my vanity, a reminder that delicate things can endure storms. I smoothed my hair into a neat ponytail, slipped into jeans and a crisp button-down, and shoved the files and laptop into a messenger bag. Downstairs, I poured a strong black coffee heart, racing mind-spinning strategies. One wrong move and the county could freeze the transfer indefinitely. At 7:15 a.m., I called Marcus. He picked up on the second ring, his voice bleary but alert. "They're asking for a community impact statement," I said, pacing the living room. "Environmental groups have filed a petition to halt any development on the dunes. They want hearings." He sighed. "That's a standard tactic. They buy time while they rally local support. We need allies on the ground who can vouch for responsible use." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "I'm calling Nina and Jeremy. We need a PR blitz, spin the narrative that this sale benefits the community." Marcus paused. "Be careful. Activists can smell insincerity. You're a nurse, they respect you. Lean into that." I took a breath. "Okay, let's do it. By 8:00 a.m., Jeremy was on speakerphone already drafting a hashtag campaign, Orchid Resilience, linking the orchid symbol to community strength. Nina, my TikTok-famous cousin, was live streaming a quick behind-the-scenes teaser. Hey Hamptons, fam, big things brewing, stay tuned for how we're turning this storm into sunshine. My stomach flip-flopped at the speed social media and local politics moving faster than any ER code I'd run. But this was deliberate public support, could tip the scales at the county hearing. I pinned the orchid petal onto my laptop bag, packing it along like a talisman. At 8:45 a.m., I strapped on my messenger bag, kissed my mother on the cheek, and hopped into a rideshare bound for the county office. The car sliced through the wet streets of Nassau, the spray of passing SUVs kicking up against the windows, reminding me of last night's rain. Despite the chill sweat beaded at my hairline, I rehearsed my opening statement. As a trauma nurse from Queens, I've seen firsthand how environmental degradation hits communities hardest. My voice wavered in my head, but I told myself this wasn't a trial by jury, it was a chance to speak truth. When I arrived, the county office lobby was already buzzing lawyers in tailored suits huddled over tablets, and activists in green t-shirts carrying petitions, reporters peering through their phone cameras. I exhaled, stepping forward with deliberate calm. At the metal detector, I flashed my RFID card, still valid for this building, and the guard gave me a curious nod. I threaded through the crowd, feeling the orchid petal press warm against my thigh. A young woman with a clipboard approached Alex Carter. She handed me a badge and pointed toward conference room B. 10 minutes. Inside, the long table was flanked on one side by slick attorneys in navy blazers, Brooks Counsel no doubt, and on the other by a dozen activists wielding homemade signs, "Protect the Dunes, no resort on sacred land." At the head sat 2 county commissioners, their faces inscrutable. Sarah Delgado touched my elbow and whispered, "You'll go first." My stomach clenched, but I stood smoothing the seams of my shirt. I surveyed the faces, anxiety and suspicion in the activists' eyes, smirks and raised eyebrows from Brooks' team. I inhaled the scent of 2 strong coffee and plastic nameplates, then began. As a trauma nurse at Bellevue, I've devoted my life to healing. My voice echoed in the room, drawing uneasy glances. But my work is meaningless if the communities I serve are poisoned by rising sea levels, by unchecked development that strips our coastline of natural buffers. I paused, heart-hammering. This land, 12 Beachview Road, is more than real estate. It's a refuge for shorebirds, a public asset for families who can't afford private beaches. I bought it to protect it, not exploit it. I intend to partner with local groups to create a community center, health clinic, educational space, and a wildlife observation deck. A murmur rippled through the activists. Some nodded, others crossed their arms. I lifted the folder and handed over a printed proposal site plans showing a small footprint on the dune's edge. Letters of support from local homeowners who feared mega resorts. My own affidavit pledging no transient rentals above 2 nights. Brooks' lawyer scoffed. "Ms. Carter," he said, voice oily, "your so-called community center sounds like a ploy to advance your fraudulent title transfer. We have evidence you misrepresented your purchase intent." Sarah Delgado interjected, crisp and authoritative. "Commissioner Edwards, these accusations are a distraction. Ms. Carter's documentation is in order." The commissioner nodded, but glanced at the activists. "We will review the environmental impact statement and hear public comment." The room grew tense as the activists approached the table one by one. A fisherman with calloused hands described how shoreline erosion threatened his nets. An older woman in a flowery scarf spoke of childhood beach picnics lost to commercial expansion. A young marine biologist cautioned about nesting sea turtles. Their voices were raw earnest, and I felt a swell of respect. These neighbors were guardian angels of the dunes. When it was my turn again, I stood beside them. "We're not adversaries," I said, voice gentle but firm. "We share a love for this place. Let me protect it and make it accessible to all, not just the ultra-wealthy." A commissioner leaned back, folding her hands. "Your proposal is interesting, Ms. Carter, but you must understand development is a double-edged sword. How can we trust someone accused of usurping a prime property?" My throat constricted. All eyes turned to me. Brooks Counsel smirking. I reached into my bag, produced the orchid petal, and placed it on the table. This orchid survived a storm when it should have perished. It thrived because it was nurtured, sheltered, and given purpose. That's what I offer this land stewardship, not exploitation. I'm not here to prove I belong in my sister's world. I'm here to redefine what belonging means for everyone who calls this coast home. Silence. You could hear a pin drop. The orchid petal lay between legal briefs and petition signatures, a symbol of fragile resilience uniting two factions. The activists exchanged glances, some wiping tears. Brooke's team leaned forward, jaws clenched. Sarah Delgado cleared her throat. The record now contains Ms. Carter's environmental plan, her community endorsements, and her nursing schedule proving residency. We ask for expedited final approval. The commissioners whispered among themselves, then the chairwoman nodded. We will take these materials under serious consideration. Final vote scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. With that, the gavel fell, not in triumph nor defeat, but in suspended judgment. I exhaled so deeply my shoulders sagged. Outside, the sky had brightened sunlight filtering through gray clouds like hope through doubt. As we exited the room, activists reached out to shake my hand. Marcus appeared with 2 hot coffees in paper cups. Jeremy's phone recorded every moment. Nina dashed over, hugging me close. "You killed it," she whispered. Tears stung my eyes. Relief, pride, and lingering fear all tangled together. Brooke's lawyer shot me a glare across the lobby that promised battle tomorrow. I met his eyes, raised my chin, and smiled. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah halfway there. "Rest up. See you at 9:30. I typed back, "Thank you." Then another text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have brought the activists in. They're just pawns. No signature." My stomach dropped. Brooke's next move, divide and conquer. I slipped the phone into my pocket, heart lurching. The ride home felt surreal, the city skyline rushing past, familiar streets feeling foreign. I clutched the orchid petal pinned inside my jacket pocket, pressing its fragile form through the mud, through the fabric. Each beat of my heart reminded me that, like that petal, I was fragile yet fierce, battered but unbroken. I thought of last night's dinner, of Brooke's crumbling expression, of the accordion of family drama. As I unlocked my apartment door, the late afternoon sun blazed through dust motes dancing in the golden light. I placed my files on the kitchen counter and sank onto the stool, mind whirling with tomorrow's reckoning. I grabbed a fresh sheet of paper and began drafting a heartfelt open letter to the community signed, "Alexandra Carter, RN Protector of the Dunes, to be released if I gained final approval." My pen scratched across the page, each word a promise, each sentence a declaration of solidarity. Then my phone buzzed again, a breaking news alert from a local paper: Carter vs. Carter family feud splits Hampton sets, stage for legal battle over historic estate. A photo of Brooke barricading the old mural behind a wooden panel, no trace of the painted orchids flashed on the screen. Beneath it, my florist's number breached a subtle quote, "An orchid's beauty lies in its tenacity." The headline cut deeper than any legal brief. The fight had gone public personal. And now the world was watching. I leaned back, feeling the weight of every alliance I'd forged, every risk I'd taken, and every gamble that tomorrow's vote would tilt in my favor. Yet I knew Brooke's final gambit could be something neither law nor activism anticipated, a move so dramatic it could shatter the fragile peace of the dunes or crown me champion of a new era. I pressed the orchid petal to my lips, closed my eyes, and whispered, "Let it be tomorrow." Then, as the last rays of sun faded behind the city skyline, I realized no matter the outcome, neither of us would ever see this coast the same way again. I woke before my alarm again, the crystalline memory of yesterday's county meeting still glittering in my mind like fractured sunlight on water. And my first thought was the orchids. I touched the petal pinned inside my jacket pocket, still crisp, still white, even after the frantic drive back to Queens Airport. The thrumming of tires on wet pavement, the nervous check-ins with Nina and Jeremy as they primed social media and local news outlets for tonight's story. I stood at my kitchen counter in my rented guest house near the dunes, heart hammering as I poured a cup of black coffee so strong it tasted like dark velvet. My laptop glowed with emails from Sarah Delgado confirming tomorrow's final board vote at 10 a.m. and a briefed press release from the Herald Tribune headlined "Orchid in the Dunes." Nurses' Crusade Captures Public Imagination. That headline gave me chills. I was no activist or celebrity, just a trauma nurse from Queens who decided to let her silence become her strategy. By mid-morning, I was on the dunes under a pale sky that threatened rain, unloading a van filled with folding chairs, speakers, and a crate of fresh white orchids for the community vigil I'd organized to carefully underscore my stewardship plan. Activists from yesterday's hearing joined me, the fisherman, with salt-weathered hands, the marine biologist with her turtle tracking data, the retired schoolteacher with her petition signatures. We formed a loose circle around a wooden podium draped in linen, where a single orchid rooted in sand marked the heart of our vigil. I watched neighbors trickle in families with beach chairs, senior citizens in floppy hats, high school kids curious for an excuse to skip classes, and sensed a ripple of unity that neither legal briefs nor political favors could manufacture. My pulse steadied. Here, among people whose lives brimmed with grit and vulnerability, I felt the raw power of collective belief. As I stepped up to the podium, my palms were dry, though a cold breeze whipped dune grass into frenzied choreography. I looked at my audience faces, lined with hope and doubt, and swallowed. "Thank you all for coming," I began, voice hushed but carrying on the wind. "We're here not to protest development, but to honor stewardship. These dunes sustain us, they shield us from storms, cradle wildlife, and uplift our spirits. Tonight, we plant these orchids as symbols of resilience." I laid the first bloom gently in the sand. Around me, others followed, each orchid gleaming white against tawny grass. The dune became a constellation of petals, pinpoints of defiance against corporate greed. Midway through the vigil, my phone buzzed with a terse alert from Sarah Brooks' team, filed a last-minute environmental appeal. They alleged soil contamination study was falsified. My heart plummeted. Soil contamination, I'd spent weeks reviewing every geological report. Nothing suggested toxins. I glanced at the dunes rippling in the gray light and bristled with anger Brooke would stoop to any smear to buy more time. I steadied myself and continued address. "We know our land is clean. We know its secrets. Let them test every grain of sand. If they find fault, it will be our chance to show them the truth, the science, and the ethics we stand for." My voice rang out stronger than I felt. After the vigil, as dusk softened the edges of sky and sea, I walked the dunes with Marcus, the orchid petal, now pinned to my collar like a badge. He'd brought copies of the independent contamination report, validated by 2 separate labs. "Let's deliver these to the board before they even consider Brooks' appeal," he said, urgency in his voice. We trekked across sand, softened by footprints, carrying my messenger bag stuffed with documents. I thought of the orchid motif again. Each bloom planted tonight was a stake in the ground, a pledge of care and transparency. Returning to the van under a sky of bruised purple clouds, I dialed Brooks' number on a dare. She answered with forced calm. "Alex." Her voice crackled over the line. "I'd advise you to stop this madness. You're out of your depth." I let the dune wind cut through her words. "Depth is where life thrives, Brooke. You might want to try it sometime." I hung up and felt a flicker of triumph and dread. I knew she'd escalate from accusations to sabotage. Back at my makeshift command center, I met Jeremy and Nina, who'd increased the social chatter, Orchid Army takes. The dunes was trending regionally. The phone lines lit up with local news requests. Even Sarah's office buzzed. I realized we'd built a movement around a single flower, around a narrative of nurse-turned-guardian. But now we needed a decisive act. Tomorrow's vote had to proceed without interference. I fired off an email to the county clerk, attaching the contamination reports, and a petition with hundreds of signatures demanding they reject Brooks' appeal on grounds of irrelevance and uphold community will. Night fell, and I sat on the porch of my rental coffee, gone cold orchids at my feet. My phone glowed with one final message, this time anonymous. "You've turned everyone against her. She won't let this go quietly." I pressed the message against my forehead, feeling its weight. I glimpsed the orchids in the sand dunes below their petals, ghostly in lamplight. I wondered what Brooke might do to break our momentum higher. Private investigators to unearth a scandal bribe, officials send goons to uproot our flowers under cover of night. The thought made my stomach twist, but beneath the twisting fear was ironclad resolve. I would protect these dunes, these people, and this symbol of orchid resilience. I rose and gathered the orchids still in water bottles, cradling them like sleeping infants, and walked through heavy wooden doors that whispered shut behind me. Inside, the hallways were deserted until a lone maintenance worker emerged from the shadows. He tipped his cap and nodded at the orchids. "Beautiful," he said softly. I smiled, handing him a bloom. "Thank you," I said. "Would you help me plant this tomorrow morning before the vote?" He hesitated, then tucked it into his pocket. "You got it, nurse. For the dunes." As I climbed the stairs to my room, clutching the other orchids, I felt the weight of every risk I'd taken. Legal gambits, social media campaigns, public displays, direct challenges to my sister. Each had been a gamble, but tonight I understood that risk was the other side of courage. In the mirror, I saw dark circles under my eyes and the glint of determination in my reflection. I tucked the orchids onto my nightstand and lay down, heart-racing mind swirling. I drifted off to sleep, thinking of tomorrow's sunrise over the dunes, the echo of petals against sand, and the question hanging in the salt-tinged air: would the board choose community and care? Or would they bow to money and manipulation? And as the lamp beside me dimmed with my breath, I realized that whatever happened at 10 a.m. tomorrow would not just decide the fate of a property, but define the meaning of home, of family, of who we are when the wind and waves batter us, and whether a single white orchid can bloom against every storm. When my alarm jolted me awake at 6:15 a.m., I felt the quiet weight of every orchid petal I'd planted pressing against my heart. The dunes outside were still dark, the sky a bruise of pre-dawn purple, but I knew I had to move quickly. I dressed in a simple navy blazer over my crisp white blouse, the orchid petal pinned just above my heart, like a secret badge of resilience. As I sipped my lukewarm coffee, I stared at the folder on the counter: final hearing papers, contamination reports, community petitions, and felt that familiar surge of adrenaline. Each document was a testament to months of silent preparation, of night shifts, and risk of learning the rules and then outsmarting them. My phone buzzed with Sarah Delgado's text board: convenes at 10. Be there by 9:30. Good luck. I took a deep breath, tasting the bitter coffee like victory. Then grabbed the folder, locked my rental's door, and headed to the dunes one last time. The wind whipped around me, carrying salt and sand, but inside, I was calm, steady, clear, unshakable. At sunrise, I stood on the crest of the dune where we'd planted our vigil orchids the night before. But horror shot through me. Half of the orchids had been uprooted petals strewn like fallen soldiers across the sand. My breath caught. Someone had come in the dark and torn up our symbol of community strength. For a second, panic surged, months of work undone in an act of spite. Then outrage washed in. This was exactly the risk I'd feared, the sabotage I knew Brooke or her allies would resort to. But the orchid petal on my lapel felt warm, as if urging me forward. I rounded up volunteers. Marcus, soaked in his white coat, scooped petals into buckets of seawater. Nina filmed the wreckage, her eyes fierce. Jeremy barked instructions to neighbors. We replanted the orchids one by one, deeper this time, anchoring them with extra sand and stakes engraved with community pledges. As the sun broke fully over the horizon, a row of white blooms stood anew against the dunes, more defiant than ever. My knuckles whitened around the folder. They could tear out petals, but they couldn't kill what had taken root in people's hearts. By 8:45 a.m., I pulled into the Nassau County office folder on my lap, orchid pin visible against my blazer. A small crowd of supporters, local fishermen, teachers, environmentalists followed behind, carrying handmade signs that read "Dunes for All" and "Orchid Resilience." Cameras from local news outlets swiveled toward us as we passed through security, the RFID card granting me access everywhere I needed to go. Inside the hearing room, I saw Brooke already seated with her legal team, tailored suits, smug expressions, phone screens glowing with confident texts. Across from her sat the county commissioners' stiff chairs lined up behind polished desks, their faces unreadable. The room hummed with tension and murmur of activists setting up banners. My pulse thrummed in my ears, but I kept my hands steady on that folder. I reminded myself this wasn't about one family feud anymore. It was about every fragile ecosystem, every overlooked community, every silent warrior who finds strength when the world writes them off. I drew in a steadying breath and stepped to the podium. When the clerk called my name, I wheeled the podium microphone close and laid out my case, commissioners. I stand before you not as a vindictive sister, but as a guardian. My purchase of 12 Beachview Road was guided by a promise to protect these dunes from predatory development and to ensure they belong to everyone who calls this coast home. I let the words settle, then carefully laid out the contamination reports and social impact plan, highlighting community center blueprints screened in the night sky at the vigil. Brooks' lawyer rose, delivering a pointed rebuttal about residency fraud that my Queen's address disqualified me from eligibility. A murmur of disbelief passed through the audience. My throat tightened. I knew this twist was coming. They'd tried to discredit me on a technicality. But I was ready. Calmly, I produced Bellevue Hospital's staffing logs, showing I worked more hours on-site in Nassau County trauma units than any visiting surgeon, and a notarized affidavit confirming my temporary apartment lease within county lines. I reminded the board that county code recognized critical service residency for essential personnel nurses included. Gasps rolled through the room as I paused, letting the math sink in. Nights on the county's soil, thousands of hours of service proof that I belonged here, not by privilege but by duty. The hearing moved to public comment. One by one, voices rose: an elderly woman who brought her grandchildren to the beach, a marine biologist who tracked nesting turtles, a school principal who hosted outdoor classes on the dunes. Each speaker wove the orchid motif into their testimony. Like the orchid, this land is resilient. We need roots that hold fast. Alex's vision lets these petals bloom for everyone. When it was my turn again, I stepped forward, tears catching in my throat. This isn't a political stunt, I said softly, voice catching. It's a promise. When I wear this orchid, I carry your stories, your hopes, your fight. I pressed the orchid pin to my chest. Silence fell like a curtain. I stepped back, pulse pounding, but my spirit calm. Just then, an unexpected announcement: one of the commissioners recused himself, citing a campaign donation from Brooks' husband, a conflict of interest. The room erupted in whispers. Brooks' lawyer slammed his hand on the table. I realized then that Brooks' allies had overplayed their hand, forcing a rare shakeup in the board lineup. With that recusal, the voting margin shifted. The remaining 4 commissioners exchanged hushed words, glancing at the community petitions and the stacked statements. The chairwoman cleared her throat. In light of today's record, we will vote to approve Ms. Carter's application, conditioned on adherence to the environmental stewardship plan presented. A tremor of relief shot through me as the gavel fell. I barely registered the applause. My knees felt weak, but I stood tall, the orchid gleaming on my lapel. Outside, reporters flooded around me. Mike's extended flashes blinding. Marcus wrapped me in a hug. Nina cried tears of joy into my shoulder. Jeremy's phone buzzed with trending hashtags. I closed my eyes and let it all wash over me. The risk, the sabotage, the logic puzzle of residency rules, the public rally. In that moment, I was more than Alex the nurse, or Alex the sister. I was Alex the steward, charged with keeping a promise that rippled far beyond sand and sea. As the crowd dispersed, Brooke emerged from the building, rain beginning to fall in gentle sheets that mirrored the first storm's mist. She met my gaze, her expression unreadable defeat, mingled with grudging respect. Between us stood the orchid pin on my lapel, and the mural of petals we'd had repainted behind her office. The world had watched our battle, and today I'd won not just my title, but the trust of a community. Brooke approached, her high heels sinking into wet pavement. She paused a few feet away, hands in her coat pockets. "Congratulations," she said, voice low, almost genuine. "You did it." I sized her up, feeling every year of rivalry condensed into those 3 words. I let the rain pepper my face and lifted my chin. "Thank you," I replied. "But this is only the beginning. The real work starts now." Her lips curved into a sharp smile that held both challenge and a silent question: will you build or will you falter? I placed a single orchid petal in her open palm, a gesture that carried both peace and promise. "Let's see where this grows," I said, voice steady. Then I turned, stepping off the courthouse steps into the soft rain, ready to transform a victory into a legacy. Behind me, the orchids in the dunes trembled in the storm wind, waiting to bloom. And I knew that what would come next, whether unity or another reckoning, would depend on the strength we'd planted together. Story 2. My name is Luca. I'm 27 now, but this story started last year on my 26th birthday. It was supposed to be a normal celebration. Nothing flashy, just a small gathering at my parents' house like we'd done every year since I could remember. I'd stopped expecting anything grand from them a long time ago. Honestly, I was mostly there for my little niece who loved birthdays, no matter whose they were. And for the carrot cake I made myself because I knew they'd never get it right. I walked in that day carrying the cake in one hand and a bottle of cheap wine in the other, already sensing the weird tension in the air, but I brushed it off. I always did. The dining table was set a little messily like my mom had thrown it together last minute. My sister Clara was scrolling through her phone at the table, barely looking up when I arrived. My Uncle Rick was already 2 drinks in, and my dad, well, he stood near the window with that same worn-out smirk he always wore when I walked into a room. The one that said, "You're not really part of this." I placed the cake down and forced a smile. "Happy birthday to me, I guess," I muttered, half joking. No one laughed. We sat down to eat. No one had even bothered to ask what I wanted for dinner. So it was lasagna again. I have nothing against lasagna, but it wasn't about the food. It was about the effort or the complete lack of it. I tried to make small talk, asked Clara about her job at the design firm, brought up my own recent promotion at work, which I'd worked hard for, and even asked my mom about the garden she usually loved talking about. Silence. And then came the moment. That one moment that pulled the rug from under me and shattered whatever scraps of hope I still had about fixing this broken family. My dad raised his glass of whiskey and said, "You know, Luca, if you vanished tomorrow, life would actually be easier for all of us." There was a bit of silence. I thought no. I hoped that maybe I misheard him. Maybe it was some terrible attempt at dark humor. But then Rick chuckled like it was the funniest thing he'd heard all day. "Man's got a point," he snorted. I turned to my mom. Her face was blank. Not shocked, not upset, just vacant. She didn't say a word, didn't even flinch. Clara stabbed her fork into the cake, took a bite, and mumbled, "Well, you do always stir things up." I couldn't move for a second. I stared at them. All of them. I wasn't sure whether to cry or scream or just walk out. My throat felt tight, my chest burned, but I said nothing. I stood up slowly, nodded once, and said, "Got it." Then I left. No scene, no yelling. I just walked out into the night, drove back to my tiny apartment, and sat in the dark for hours trying to understand what had just happened. And you know what hurt the most? It wasn't even that my dad had said that. It was how casual it was, like I was just some mild inconvenience they'd rather not deal with. I didn't sleep that night. The words kept echoing in my head. "If you vanish tomorrow." So I decided to do exactly that, not out of spite. Not at first. I just needed to be gone. To be somewhere they couldn't reach, somewhere they couldn't dismiss me like a piece of clutter. The next morning, I packed my bags. I didn't have much, but I took everything important. My documents, my laptop, a few framed photos from better days. I called my boss and used up the 3 weeks of vacation I'd saved. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I shut off my phone. I disappeared. I headed to the cabin. It was a small, secluded place in the woods that my grandfather used to own. When he passed, it sat untouched for years. No one in the family cared about it. Too far, too rustic. No Wi-Fi, no plumbing updates. But I loved that place. Grandpa used to take me there every summer. I had the keys, and the deed had quietly passed to me after he passed something. The rest of the family never bothered to read the paperwork about. It was mine, a fact I'd never advertised, because to them, I was the black sheep, the burden, the kid who never quite fit in. I arrived that afternoon, and the cabin was dusty. The fireplace untouched, but it felt more like home than my parents' house ever did. I lit a fire, unpacked my books, and breathed for the first time in months. No calls, no expectations, no sarcastic remarks. Just quiet, peaceful, intentional. Quiet. The first few days were just healing. I cooked, hiked, journaled, and finally let myself cry. I relived that birthday dinner 1,000 times in my mind, and each time I found more clarity. I hadn't been loved in that house. I'd been tolerated barely. And now I was done being tolerable. A week passed before I finally checked my backup phone. I kept it off, only using it for emergencies, but curiosity got the better of me, so I turned it on just long enough to see the barrage of messages and missed calls. "Clara, where are you? Dad's freaking out. Mom, please call me when you can. It's urgent." "Rick, we need to talk seriously, Dad. Call me now." I frowned. That was unexpected, so I did some digging. I used my laptop to check a few things from a secure hotspot nearby, and what I found made my blood run cold. Credit card payments had bounced, late fees piling up. Clara's car had been towed. Eileen placed on the family house, all in just a week, and every single bill had my name on it because they'd been using my credit, my name, for years. They thought I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't care that I owed them. My dad had me co-sign on things when I was barely 19, promising it would build credit for me. My mom had quietly used my social to open an emergency line of credit when Clara lost her job 2 years ago. I hadn't noticed because I never checked. I trusted them, but when I vanished, so did their safety net. And now they were desperate. But I wasn't ready to pick up the phone just yet. Not until I understood the full extent of what they'd done. Not until I knew everything. So I drove into town the next day to speak with a lawyer. And that's when I discovered something that made me sit down in the parking lot, clutching the folder in my hands, barely able to breathe, something they didn't expect I'd ever find out, and something I planned to use very, very carefully. The lawyer's name was Mira, late 30s, sharp eyes, no-nonsense voice that cut through pleasantries like a scalpel. I walked into her office with a folder full of bank statements, co-signed agreements, and a numb feeling in my gut. She flipped through everything slowly, her fingers pausing every few pages, her expression tightening with each new revelation. By the end, she closed the folder, leaned back in her chair, and said, "Luca, this isn't just financial abuse. This is fraud. If you wanted to, you could press criminal charges." I blinked at her against my parents. She didn't hesitate. "Yes. And your sister, too. All 3 of them used your identity. There's a paper trail a mile long. They forged signatures, opened multiple lines of credit in your name, and she tapped one document with her pen. They leveraged your name as collateral for the second mortgage on their house." It felt like the floor dropped beneath me. "Wait, what mortgage?" I asked. She opened another file and slid it across the desk. 3 years ago, right after your grandfather passed, your father and mother filed paperwork claiming you agreed to co-sign the equity loan on the family home. They used the property value to take out $120,000. That's how they paid off Clara's credit card debt. Rick's DUI lawyer, apparently part of your mom's failed catering business. I sat back in the chair, my hands trembling slightly. They forged my name. Mira nodded. They never thought you'd find out as long as you kept paying your own bills and never questioned your credit score. It worked for them. And if I hadn't disappeared, they'd still be leeching off of you. I stared at the ceiling for a long moment and looked back down. "So what are my options?" Mira folded her hands. "You can report the fraud. That'll trigger a full investigation. The charges could follow. Or if you'd rather avoid court, you could hit them where it really hurts financially. We freeze the accounts, demand repayment. You have enough proof here to force them into default in the house." She gave me a look. "Well, technically, since you never agreed to the mortgage, the loan is invalid. The bank will investigate. And if it's confirmed, the entire mortgage could be reversed. That house would be flagged, possibly repossessed. At the very least, they'll have to refinance it without you." It took me a long time to speak. When I finally did, my voice came out quiet, controlled. "I want to take back everything. Every penny, every asset they stole. Not because I need it, but because they thought they were entitled to it." Mira just nodded. "Then we start today." And we did. First, she helped me file a fraud report with the credit bureaus. We flagged every account tied to my name. That meant every card they used stopped working immediately. Their phone bills, utilities, even the car insurance under Clara's name, but funded with my credit, froze within 48 hours. Next, she had me send a formal demand letter. Not a text, not a call, a notarized letter delivered through certified mail. It laid out every violation: the forged documents, the misused credit, the unauthorized loans. It ended with one sentence: "You have 10 days to settle the debt, or legal proceedings will begin." I didn't expect them to respond right away, but I was wrong. The texts came first, dozens of them. My mom begging for a conversation, Clara accusing me of ruining her life. My dad's message was short and smug. "You're bluffing. We did what we had to do for the family." I didn't reply. Then the voicemail started. Rick called trying to play mediator. "Come on, kid, you're making this worse than it is. You've always been the responsible one. Just come back and we'll fix it as a family." But I wasn't going back. Not this time. I stayed in the cabin letting Myra handle everything from her office. Every day I felt lighter. Every day. They grew more desperate. One morning, Clara sent a selfie of her crying in front of her repossessed car. That same afternoon, my mom left me a message that cracked halfway through her voice, barely holding together. "Luca, please. Your father's blood pressure has been through the roof. We're behind on everything. We might lose the house. This isn't like you. You've always been the peacemaker." I almost felt bad. Almost. But then I remembered her sitting there in silence on my birthday while my dad said the ugliest thing a father can say to his child. And then came day 10. I was out chopping wood when a car pulled up the long gravel driveway to the cabin. At first, I thought it might be a delivery from town. But when I stepped around the trees and saw who was getting out of the car, I froze. It was them. All of them. My dad, my mom, Clara. Even Rick lagging behind. They looked older, worn down like the stress of the last week, had aged them 5 years. My dad's shirt was untucked. Clara's makeup was smudged, and my mom looked like she hadn't slept in days. They stood there huddled together, like a defense line. My dad stepped forward. "We need to talk." I didn't say anything. I just leaned the axe against the log, wiped my hands, and walked up the porch slowly. I opened the front door wide, and standing just behind it was Mira. She held the folder in her hand, and she was smiling. Mira didn't move. She just stood there, half-shadowed by the doorway, holding that thick manila folder like it was a weapon. And in a way, it was. My dad blinked confused for a second, then narrowed his eyes like he finally realized she wasn't just some friend or random visitor. He looked back at the others, then back at me. "What is this?" he said, trying to keep his voice low and calm like he was still in control, like we were about to have a rational family discussion over coffee. I didn't answer. I stepped aside and gestured toward the small front porch table. "Sit. If you want to talk, we talk here. All of you." They hesitated. Rick muttered something under his breath, probably about lawyers, but eventually they climbed the steps and took their seats. My mom's hands were shaking. Clara didn't even make eye contact. She kept pulling at a loose thread on her sleeve like she was trying to disappear into it. Once they were all seated, Mira came out calm as ever and set the folder down on the table between us. She didn't sit. She didn't need to. "I'm Mira Kovac," she said simply. "I'm Mr. DiLorenzo's legal representative before any of you speak. I'm going to remind you this conversation is being recorded and that anything you say can be used in legal proceedings." Dad rolled his eyes, scoffing. "Are you serious? You brought a lawyer to ambush your own family?" Mira didn't even blink. "You ambushed him first, for the past 7 years." Clara finally looked up. "This is crazy. You're blowing everything out of proportion." "No," I said quietly, stepping forward. "You're just not used to hearing me speak without backing down. That. Shut her up." Mira opened the folder and pulled out a few sheets. "Let's start with the forged mortgage documents," she said, laying out the paperwork. "Here's the signature you claimed Luca gave you, signed while he was attending a company retreat in another country. His passport confirms it." My mom opened her mouth, but Mira raised a hand. "I'm not done." More pages were laid out. Credit card applications in my name. A car lease for Rick's son, underwritten by my credit score. Clara's boutique loan filed with my social security number. My dad leaned forward, his voice rising. "We're family. These weren't crimes. We were just trying to get by." Myra's smile was icy. "Intent doesn't negate illegality. And since Luca never consented to any of this, your justification won't hold up in court." Silence along. Thick silence. I leaned on the railing and crossed my arms. Do you know what it felt like to be told that my absence would make life easier for you on my birthday? Do you even realize what you said? What it meant? My dad looked away. Clara was silent. My mom opened her mouth, but again nothing came out. I left. I continued because I needed peace. Because for years, I've been the safety net, the backup plan, the financial crutch. None of you even thanked. And the second I tried to breathe, you panicked because I was never a son to you. I was a tool, something useful. And when I stopped being useful, you called me selfish. Mira took out the final sheet. This is a formal notice. Luca is filing to freeze all joint accounts where his name is involved. He will also be pursuing compensation for damages to his credit, unauthorized debts, and emotional distress. The total amount stands at roughly $194,000, not including legal fees. My dad stood suddenly, knocking his chair back. You think you're going to take us down with this? You think a judge will side with you over your own family? That's when I stepped in closer. No! I think a judge will side with the evidence, I said, voice steady. And trust me, there's more. I have the emails, the texts, even voice memos. You're not as careful as you think, Rick muttered. This is nuts. We didn't mean for it to go this far. Mira glanced at her watch. You have 7 days to respond to the notice. If you choose to settle out of court, we're open to negotiation. If not, we proceed with full legal action. Clarice suddenly burst out. So that's it? You're just going to destroy us, everything we've worked for? I laughed bitterly. Worked for you, used me. Everything you have was mine. Built with my credit, paid for with my effort. I gave you years, and you gave me what? A birthday toast that basically told me I was disposable. She looked like she wanted to argue, but instead she broke down crying. My mom reached out toward me, and for a split second, her eyes softened. Luca, please, we're family. I stared at her hand. You were my family, I said, and backed away. They stood in silence, staring at me like they didn't know who I was anymore. Like I turned into someone unrecognizable. Maybe I had. Or maybe they were finally seeing the version of me I had hidden for years. The version that didn't beg for love, that didn't flinch when pushed. The sun was beginning to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows over the porch. Mira packed the folder back into her briefcase and glanced at me. Are we done here? I nodded. She turned to them. I suggest you get a lawyer. They stood one by one and shuffled back to the car. No more shouting, no more bravado, just silence. The car door slammed. The engine started and then they were gone. But this wasn't over, not even close. They didn't respond within the 7 days Mira gave them. Not with the settlement, not with a counteroffer, not even with an apology. Just more silence, the kind that used to make me cave when I was younger. When I was the one tiptoeing around their moods, desperate to fix things before they got worse. But now I wasn't the one waiting. Mira filed the lawsuit on a Monday morning. I signed every page with a calm hand, feeling lighter with each stroke of the pen. Fraud, identity theft, financial damages, emotional distress. We weren't playing soft anymore. That same week, Clara posted a cryptic message on social media. Something about betrayal, about family turning into strangers. Friends of hers commented with hearts and sad emojis. I didn't respond. I didn't explain because for once I didn't know anyone. An explanation. By the following month, the consequences hit hard. First, the court flagged the forged mortgage. My dad tried to argue it was a family arrangement, but Mira brought receipts. Literally bank transfers, time-stamped communications, my travel records proving I wasn't even in the country when I supposedly signed. The judge didn't even blink. The loan was declared invalid. The house wasn't repossessed yet, but the bank froze all actions tied to it, including refinancing options. That meant the late payments started stacking up. Interest ballooned, and since their finances were tangled up in the credit lines under my name, their entire financial web began collapsing. Fast. Clara's boutique shut down quietly without announcement. Just one day the closed for renovations sign appeared and never came down. Rick's car, the one-eyed unknowing co-signed, was repossessed 2 months after he missed back-to-back payments. He left a furious voicemail calling me ungrateful and warning me that karma always comes around. I deleted it without listening to the end. My mom called once. Just once. She didn't beg. She didn't yell. She just said, "You've made your point. We're drowning." And I answered calmly, "No, I've only just started cleaning up the mess you made." The lawsuit took nearly a year to resolve. They dragged their feet, tried to delay hearings, claimed emotional hardship, even attempted to gaslight the narrative in court, saying I was unstable, holding a grudge, or seeking revenge. But Mira was relentless, professional, precise. By the time the final hearing arrived, the judge ruled in my favor on every count. They were ordered to pay restitution dollars, $98,000. Total. They lost access to every account tied to my name. My credit was cleared of every fraudulent charge. Clara was even hit with a penalty for forging loan applications, though it stopped short of criminal charges because I agreed not to pursue them. That was the one concession I made. Not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I used part of the settlement to restore my credit and invest in my future. The rest, I used it to renovate the cabin. It took 6 months, but by the time it was done, the place was unrecognizable. The plumbing was updated, solar panels on the roof, a cozy office space for remote work, a fireplace with a stone chimney. My grandfather always dreamed of finishing. It became my home. Not just a place to run to, but a place to live. One afternoon, while I was hauling some firewood, a car pulled into the drive again. I almost ignored it. Visitors were rare, and I preferred it that way. But something told me to check. It was Clara alone. She stepped out in worn jeans and a hoodie. Too big for her. No makeup, no performance. Just her. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just humbled. She didn't come close. She stood by the car hands buried in her sleeves. "I'm not here to fight," she said. I wanted to see where you went, what you chose instead of us." I nodded slowly, and she looked around the trees, the porch, the quiet air. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "I get it now. I didn't speak. I was awful to you." She continued, "We all were, I think. I think we needed you to be the responsible one because none of us were ready to grow up. And when you finally stopped holding us up, we collapsed because we'd never learned to stand on our own." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that an apology?" She met my eyes. "It's an attempt. I don't expect forgiveness. I just thought if you ever wondered whether we regretted it, we do. Or at least I do." I believed her, not because her voice shook or because she looked tired, but because there was no begging, no manipulation, no defense, just quiet truth. I nodded once. "I appreciate you coming all the way here to say it." She lingered, maybe expecting more, maybe hoping for something else, but I didn't offer it. After a moment, she smiled faintly, turned and got back into the car as the engine faded into the distance. I turned back to the cabin, the cold wind brushing my face, and for the first time in years, I felt free. Not just from the debt, not just from the house, but from the weight of being the good son, the quiet fixer, the invisible crutch. I had faced them, exposed them, fought back, and I hadn't needed to scream or break down to do it. I just needed to walk away to vanish. And when I did, they finally saw me. But by then, I was already gone.